Okay, welcome back, everyone. This is like the seventh day, I think, of my prep updates. Today, I wanted to one, clarify the evidence from should Europeans develop an independent nuclear deterrent that people are apparently using after all, as a link to US withdrawal. I wanted to talk about the UK-France nuclear agreement. I've written a lot of notes here about it. I think it's actually quite a big deal. I wanted to talk about potential responses analytically to most of the common arguments. And then finally, I put on the Discord, but I'll also just say here, I'm like looking for people to send me arguments, not like you don't have to leak like prep or anything, but like tell me an argument that you have heard or an argument you have thought of that you want me to respond to, and I will respond to it on this channel. So here I'm going to be doing that with two arguments that I was sent. One about the potential for the resolution to lead to testing of nuclear weapons in Algeria, which would be a bad thing. And second, the argument that apparently the EU is sort of leading the way on nuclear disarmament right now, and that is a good thing. And if we do the resolution, then they will like lose credibility to do that, which is a bad thing. So I will be prepping some responses today to both of those arguments. And if you send me an argument in the future that you have heard or that you've thought of, even if you just explain the basics of the argument, I will put it on here and I will respond to it and put it out in the public so that people know how to deal with these more squirrely types of arguments. Okay, first, let's talk about the Horowitz evidence. So the thing about this evidence is that people are using it to say that the US will sort of withdraw its commitment in the event that France engages in nuclear sharing. So what I want to do, and it's this paragraph specifically that people are reading. So what I want to do is read through every single sentence of this and really like make sure that we are doing a close reading and really understanding what it's saying. So I'm going to break this first into different sentences. Here we go. Here we go. And that's just a big sentence. Okay. So nuclear proliferation is anything but risk-free. So we're talking about nuclear proliferation, presumably different allies developing their own nuclear arsenals. Let's actually go and make sure. Let's just really make sure we have the context for this. So, and nuclear proliferation is anything but risk-free. So let's read this. Considering the difficulties of extended nuclear deterrence, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, instinctively regard the acquisition of nuclear weapons as the most viable path forward. So this is going at it alone, right? This is the difficulties of extended nuclear deterrence. So this is not extended nuclear deterrence. Instead, this is talking about going at it alone. This is proliferating alone. This is um, the acquisition of nuclear weapons, right? So it gives the example of Poland, which is obviously not nuclear sharing. This is proliferation instead. It says that they could develop their own nuclear arsenals. Again, this is not nuclear sharing, and it would be risky, blah, 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 blah. They could technically do it. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about proliferation, and by proliferation, it very clearly means individual countries developing their own nuclear arsenals. Okay, and it says it's risky. Cool. Next sentence. If Europeans misinterpret US commitments while Washington remains dedicated to preserving its order, it is likely to take steps to stop its allies. So, what does it mean by misinterpreting US commitments? Probably that's talking about nuclear proliferation, right? Like that's the previous sentence. So that's the context. So, if they misinterpret US commitments by proliferating, while Washington is actually dedicated to preserving its order. And this sort of gives extra evidence for that, right? Because like preserving its order is like preserving the order of security guarantees and the nuclear order as well, right? We read in the Schofield book, for instance, that in terms of like w international order, countries that have nuclear weapons don't want other countries, even their allies, to develop nuclear weapons because it sort of dilutes the power that they have of that exclusive access to this kind of tool of war. So that's kind of the order that I think it's talking about, and it would take steps to stop its allies. So what does this actually mean? It means if European countries proliferate, um, and the US is still committed to Europe, then the US will, or I guess to its current order, whatever, then the US will try to stop that prolif. That makes sense. Next, past experience suggests that the United States can mobilize substantial diplomatic, economic, and political resources to exert pressure on both friends and adversaries to prevent nuclear proliferation. So again, we're very clearly talking about nuclear proliferation. This just means if nuclear proliferation starts, the US can exert pressure to try to stop it. That's it. That's all this means, and is likely to. And is likely to. Cool. Well, I guess it doesn't say that they're likely to, but I feel like that's kind of implied here, right? This part says it's likely to, so we've got that. Cool. Conversely, if Washington were to fully abandon its commitment, so okay, first big thing I want to point out here is the parallel structure here. So the word conversely, um, versus this part here. So we have, um, so this is like if Washington is dedicated to preserving its order, then. But if Washington is not dedicated to preserving its order, then. So this is very important to understand the structure of this paragraph, because when it says if Washington were to fully abandon its commitment, it is not referencing an example of exerting pressure. It is referencing the converse to this scenario, right? So like scenario one, Washington is totally dedicated to Europe, and so it will take steps to stop prolif. Scenario two, Washington is not dedicated to Europe, and so Russia, I guess, Russia will not stop using force to prevent proliferation. So either Washington prevents proliferation or it abandons them and Russia prevents proliferation. Either way, proliferation gets prevented. Um, that's the point of this paragraph, right? And so this conversely is doing a lot of important work here to really show us evidence that this is not an example of what Washington might do if proliferation happens. Um, okay, so this means in the hypothetical um, event of the US no longer seeking to preserve its current order, the article says nothing about the circumstances that might trigger this, right? Like it's not saying that proliferation could cause the US to abandon this commitment, just that if the US were to have already abandoned the commitment for some other random reason it doesn't speak on, then um, then uh, it wouldn't stop prolif, and Russia would attempt to instead, right? That makes sense. Cool. And then lastly, considering key nuclear facilities are pretty easy to identify and strike, Russia will continue to hold an escalation edge through its bigger capabilities. European nations will likely face serious challenges in any counter-proliferation scenario. Cool. So if Russia tries to stop prolif, it probably will succeed. That's like my reading of this. So then the reading of the entire paragraph is either the US will stop prolif or Russia will stop prolif. Either way, it's very challenging. However, the way that people are reading this right now is to say if nuclear sharing happens, then the US will abandon Europe. That is just an incorrect reading of this paragraph. It is not talking at all about sharing. In fact, as we just read, the previous paragraph clearly shows this is like talking about an alternative scenario to nuclear sharing, which is specifically individualized nations proliferating on their own. And two, it doesn't even say that prolif will cause abandonment. And again, that's prolif, not even nuclear sharing, but it doesn't even say prolif will cause abandonment. It says that, um, you know, prolif will be prevented in either scenario, even the scenario of abandonment, which it doesn't say would happen for any particular reason. So this evidence does not say anything about US uh, abandoning or even leaning in that direction as a result of sharing. I think that's just a misreading of the evidence. So I would hope that people stop reading this in that way. Cool. And hopefully this is useful for you. I feel like this kind of close reading of evidence to really look at the context and the paragraph structure is something that's badly lacking in PF these days and leads to lots of evidence violations that are very, very easy to call out, in my opinion. Okay. Next thing. This is pretty huge. Something that happened like yesterday, the day before. Macron is in the UK right now, talking with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and they are agreeing to a lot of things, and it can be a little bit complicated. So let's talk about exactly what is being agreed to. First thing that they agreed to is with regards to Ukraine. There are these missiles that are being sold to Ukraine that are called Storm Shadow. It's like a crazy cool name. And they're going to order more. They're building more. They're built in England. They're gonna make more. They're also going to accelerate the development of new kinds of missiles to replace the Storm Shadow cruise missiles. So we've got like innovation on missiles, we've got buying more missiles, that stuff. Okay, cool. Whatever. We don't care quite as much about that for the purposes of our debate. But the important thing that's happening is that they have agreed to strengthen nuclear cooperation. Strengthen nuclear cooperation. What does this actually look like? So they're coordinating their deterrent forces. Um, I guess that means that they are like uh, creating institutional connections so that they can act in tandem more easily, which is good. That smooths out, like, it means that in the event of a threat to Europe, for instance, that threatens both of their vital interests, which we'll talk about in a second, they can both act together as if they had pooled nuclear resources. Now, this doesn't mean that like the UK will be able to direct the French nuclear arsenal or something like that, or vice versa. But it does mean that they are smoothing out channels to be able to very quickly work together in a nuclear deployment, for instance, it seems. And that's what it says here, joint response to emergency threats in Europe. And if you look up any of this, you'll find exactly what I'm referencing. In addition to that, they're also intensifying other projects. So they're like developing more types of missiles again, more interesting types of weapons, maybe using AI to like be able to direct missiles, or really they're using AI to write algorithms so that they can launch missiles and drones more easily in different ways. And like space tech and stuff. All of that's like theoretical, like, okay, maybe you can write some weird scenarios based on it, but it's just weird uniqueness that's adding on to a bunch of other weird uniqueness that already exists. Cool. So they are currently at a conference um, in the UK right now, agreeing to all of these different things. The important things that I want to note about the nuclear coordination part is that we've got some language coming out of it that has not really been seen as much before. It sort of follows some other language that we've seen already. For example, the two nations historically have already agreed that for France, any threat to the vital interests of the UK, they say that they cannot imagine a threat to the UK that would not also be a threat to France, and then vice versa as well. So the UK can't imagine a threat to France that would not also be a threat to the UK. Why does this matter? It's because in nuclear doctrine, especially French nuclear doctrine, a threat to the vital interests of one country, specifically a threat to French vital interests, constitutes a reason to use nuclear weapons. So what they're effectively saying is like, hey, if the UK gets beat up, then we're gonna use nuclear weapons. That's what they're saying. And this is not like a binding commitment or anything. It is just rhetoric. It's just signaling to adversaries that this is the case. But until now, we haven't really seen the same level of commitment. I mean, even though this is a symbolic commitment either way, we haven't really seen the same level of rhetorical commitment to the rest of Europe. It's kind of just been between the UK and France. But at this conference, for what I can, as far as I can tell, the first time, the two nations have also agreed that like the same sort of applies to the rest of Europe. They said that they share a unique responsibility for the security of Europe, that they will be ready to mount a joint nuclear response in the event of any extreme military threat. And specifically, they've said that uh, there is no extreme threat to Europe as a continent that would not prompt a response by both nations. It would not be a threat to the vital interests of both nations. So now we're extending that kind of rhetorical commitment to the rest of Europe as well. This, again, is not formal by any means. Um, but we are getting a bit of extended deterrent. And of course, like, this is not what Macron would call it. They're very sensitive about calling it extended deterrent at all because of the sovereignty stuff. But they are definitely working very closely on nuclear deterrence. And more than ever before, they are starting to take more strides rhetorically to signal that that nuclear deterrence covers the rest of Europe as well. Um, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that's happening. Again, like next gen missiles, integrating different stuff. Um, and yeah, again, this is a great quote that I read from, I think, a Wall Street Journal article that they appear to be offering both countries nuclear weapons as a deterrent for all of Europe while establishing greater independence from any safety net provided by the US's much larger arsenal. Um, so this sounds like pretty close to what the resolution would realistically do, right? Like an independent kind of deterrent, offering both countries nuclear weapons as a deterrent for all of Europe. And to be honest, in my opinion, it sounds like maybe a diluted version of the resolution, but a version of the resolution that also like very clearly escapes basically all of the core disads. Like I don't really know what the link to a lot of the disads from this agreement would be. And of course, because it's an agreement that has actually happened, we can sort of find evidence that says that those things haven't happened. And if it does link to the disads, then it non-uniques the disads. So I think this is just like incredibly good for the con and pretty bad for the pro. Um, I don't know that it will actually change the topic that much. Like people always, this stuff always happens, right? Some random news headline comes out or in the middle of a topic, and people are all like, "Oh my gosh, this is going to completely change everything," and then it doesn't really change very much at all. This one I think is maybe a little bit different because this is just like fantastic uniqueness for the con to just be like, why the heck do we need to do this with the EU? Like, there's a million things that are already happening that are likely to continue happening and likely to grow in the future, especially if the threat of Russia continues growing, which sort of like the uniqueness depends on. Um, I think that it is incredibly unclear like why we need the resolution. Like especially given that there's lots of risks inherent to the resolution, which is why it's a balanced topic. And of course there are benefits in the resolution too, but the benefits don't seem to be as unique as the risks, right? Like it seems like we can get the benefits without a lot of the risks by doing things like this, like just sort of like more low-key bilateral agreements that don't necessarily do the same formal sharing, but still have a similar effect in terms of the benefits and reassuring of allies. Of course, it doesn't go as far. So, like, arguably someone could say this doesn't really change the topic at all because it doesn't go as far as nuclear sharing. And so both the link to the advantages and the disads on the topic will still exist because you just go further, right? Maybe it's like scalar in some way, or it's unique to nuclear sharing in some way. And so then it doesn't really change the topic at all. But my opinion is that this actually hurts a lot of the uniqueness on the Pro quite a lot, especially given how recent it is. A lot of the cards that are currently being read on the Pro are not in the context of this agreement, right? So, like, for example, if we're reading a Polish Prolov scenario, I can just be like, okay, yeah, that was then, but now, um, logically, if you're right that a nuclear sharing agreement is sufficient to calm Poland down, why is this not also sufficient? This seems like a very big step in the right direction. Plus, they're engaging in bilateral talks with Poland to reassure them specifically. And really seem to be extending their nuclear deterrent. If this is what they're saying in public, what are they saying in private? They're probably making more formal reassurances that they will use nuclear weapons in support of Poland. And so, why the heck is that not sufficient? Like, especially given that what the most likely implementation of a nuclear sharing agreement is likely to be quite dilute as well and not really look like the same capacity as NATO nuclear sharing. I feel like this is not so different. It just sort of avoids a lot of the disads of things like Euro federalism and like the different things that we're talking about in the con case while still allowing us to deter Russia and assure allies and stuff like that. So I'm a little bit worried for pro ground. I was already a little bit worried for pro ground on the topic. So I will have to do some thinking about how we can get more pro ground. So that's that. Tomorrow I'll probably talk about how this doesn't actually matter at all and how the pro can respond, but this is my current state of thinking. Next thing I want to do. We have a lot of arguments that we know to be pretty common that are being read at camp. I want to just talk about some basic responses, weaknesses that I see in each of them, strengths that I see, and vaguely which ones I like and which ones I don't. So first, the NATO and US trade-off argument. I think this is a quite good argument. It clearly was sort of intended by the framers of the resolution. The independent deterrent thing makes the link a little bit stronger. I think the best response is no link. That most likely this will be done in a sensitive way that explicitly complements the US deterrent uh, rather than replacing it, even while remaining independent. I feel like an independent deterrent doesn't have to be a deterrent that it replaces an existing one. Just like nuclear forces didn't replace conventional forces, right? So I think that's the best argument. And really, this is, I think, quite a good piece of defense because this is quite likely, right? Like all of the rhetoric we see, all of the incentive structures we see in Europe are all completely aligned to making sure this is done in the most sensitive way. They will probably have hours and hours and hours of discussions about specifically how they can do this without causing any trade-offs with NATO and the US. And I think that those conversations are just likely to result in things that will work. So it's a pretty straightforward no link argument that I think will be pretty effective. Other than that, I guess, technically there's like US hedge bad stuff or NATO bad stuff, or like US already withdrawing, or NATO already collapsing. I think these arguments are a lot weaker, but they exist. So maybe worth exploring. Other than that, I guess you could just say that like the French nuclear sharing agreement is more effective than NATO, and then just use the link defense as sort of a tiebreaker. I don't think that's that effective either. I think the link defense is probably the best bet that you have. Um, okay. Next is deterrence. And I guess also the uniqueness, right? Like the app is probably going to be wanting to read this uniqueness anyway. I don't think it's the strongest because like there's nuance, right? Like the US might be rhetorically withdrawing, but in practice is not withdrawing that much. And also like even if they are, like uh the headlines are exaggerating it more than it should be in debate, as in like the fact that the US is withdrawing is very bad, maybe, but it's not a total withdrawal. Like they're still very much there. They're still very much at play. So I think that there's still very much that more that could be withdrawn. Okay, next is deterrence. I think deterrence is a pretty good argument. Classic responses to deterrence. I think the single best response to deterrence. I mean, I'll get to it in a sec, actually. The basic responses are Russia, like the threat is not that high now. Russia has low incentives to attack Europe, especially while bogged down in Ukraine. This is like a mid-tier response. I think there are easy ways to counter it. The next response would be, this is probably a better one, million different ways to deter Russia. Um, and specifically, this is a great nuance. I don't know why people don't read this. Like, more of these ways will be pursued in the event of a gradual escalation with Russia, um, that happens before an invasion, which will happen before, like even before the invasion of Ukraine. Like I remember Biden saying that we know it's going to happen in like a week, and then it happened. Like we have pretty good intelligence. We know when these things are going to happen, and then we can just implement the other deterrence measures then. And that is very likely to happen. So. I don't like there needs to be a comparison in this argument between those other alternative deterrence measures and the nuclear sharing agreement, which I think is very difficult to pull off. Plus, I guess these could be generalized practical solutions or whatever. The best response, though, is just like if you can spam a million reasons that deterrence fails under a nuclear sharing agreement, um, or backfires. This could be like the NATO US trade-off stuff. This just could be like France is not very credible, or the EU is not very credible because of bureaucracy or whatever. Then I think this argument just goes away. Or potentially you get like a link turn, you could get like a complacency disadvantage against it as well. And this is actually quite important because this one response, if you cut a bunch of reasons and you implicate them to deterrence, as long as you also implicate them through perception, right? Like actors that we're talking about are smart, they say that this is true, then I think you just get a takeout on every F argument. Like, to be completely honest, I can't think of a single F argument other than maybe like US hedge bad, that does not rely on deterrence being better as a result of nuclear sharing or being perceived as better as a result of nuclear sharing, which mostly relies on it actually being better. So if you are able to just write like a bunch of reasons why deterrence does not improve or it actually gets worse in the pro world, I think you have a response to any AF argument, which makes it very versatile. Like think about just in terms of time trade-offs, right? Like if they are reading three contingents on the pro and you read responses to each of them, and you have a first rebuttal. So that's 4 minutes spread over three different arguments. You're working with a little over a minute for each argument in terms of responses. But if you read an overview that responds to all three, let's say the overview is 1 minute, then you haven't decreased the time that you have for each contingent by very much. You still have a minute for each contingent specifically, but you now have an additional minute that applies to all three. So now you have in practice, you have 2 minutes of responses against any of the three contingents that they choose to go for in the back half, which is much more than the normal, slightly more than 1 minute that you would have spreading your rebuttal between the three contingents. So this is just strictly, I think, a winning strategy. Okay, especially if it's offensive, right? Like that's just like great. You can even if you don't win a net link turn, you can still like wash the argument. Like, oh, they have reasons this will increase. We have reasons it will decrease. You don't really know. What you do know is this shiny independent argument that we have over here that you should vote on. Okay. Next argument is Poland. I think Poland is probably, or like prolif in general, or really even broader than that worse things will happen instead. I think is the best argument for the pro that I can currently think of. So let's block it out. We already talked about this last time, but I think the Poland argument suffers from a few weaknesses. First is that like Poland is not going to proliferate. Even if they say that they are, like it's just political posturing, and there are a million different ways that Poland will be stopped from proliferating by the US or by other European countries before it finishes or before it really starts. Next argument is uh, no link. They don't really get reassured by this. You know, either A, you win your little deterrence fails thing, and then Poland knows this, and then bada bing, bada boom, or you just win that like Poland wants to have control over its own arsenal, which wouldn't happen under the pro. Okay. And then also, I just don't think like maybe domino effect is wrong. So Polish prolif doesn't cause other prolif. Um, Even if it does break the NPT, um, may and arguably non-unique, right? Because like Iran, etc. Um, and Polish prolif alone is really not the end of the world. They're stable, arguably. Um, with nuclear sharing and their own independent deterrent, I think that they probably don't have a huge risk of like a Russian preemptive strike. I think it's probably going to be okay, realistically. Okay. German prolif, same responses as Polish prolif. The first one just applies even more. Okay. Oh, also just like prolif turns, right? Outweigh the link. Cool. All right, that's cool. Next, NPT. This is the neg argument that it breaks the NPT. One, arguably, it doesn't break the NPT for the same reason that like the current NATO arrangement does. Or else, there's like a double bind the current NATO arrangement does, which makes this non-unique. Two, Belarus thumps. That just means Belarus is already getting nuclear sharing from Russia. So, like, why does that not already rupture the NPT? Same with Iran, supposedly going for nuclear proliferation right now. Um, And then NPT sucks arguments just doesn't work very well. It doesn't do a good job of actually changing material incentives. Countries only proliferate in in the face of existential threats. Um, and the NPT just doesn't work very well to counteract those incentives. This is kind of a realist take on it. Like it's it reflects pre-existing incentives rather than creating incentives. So like for instance, like if a country like under the NPT, right? Like you if you violate the NPT, you get sanctioned by the international community. That's because the international community had a reason to sanction you already. Like NPT or not. If they want to sanction you, they will. If they don't, they won't. Especially for great powers, like the US will stop you either way, even if someone else violated the NPT. Like they don't really care. Um, and this is enforced kind of asymmetrically already anyway, so I think that the NPT maybe largely is just symbolic if you subscribe to the perspective of this response, which is very realist. There obviously are other perspectives that like no, treaties specifically are costly signals in domestic politics and international politics, etc., etc. Like credibility actually matters, but the realist would say that's not true. Okay. Any other responses to NPT? Oh yeah, like Poland or other AF prolif scenarios. Obviously, turn the link. Okay. I think that's a pretty good strategy. Cool. Next argument is cables. There's just no link. Deterrence doesn't really solve cables because there is plausible deniability. And everyone knows you're not going to nuke Russia for cutting some internet traffic. Like, and then also no impact, especially to like NATO and critical infrastructure. There are backups and satellite internet. I don't know, you could use Starlink or something too. So that seems fine. Um, I also don't like for some reason people are reading this as like submarines solve. I don't know why deterrence like changes between like sea deterrence and land deterrence. Like the whole point of French deterrence especially is deterrence by punishment, right? So it's like if you attack and do something bad, then we will hit you. It doesn't matter if you attack in one area, we'll just hit you in the same area no matter what, which is Moscow, right? Like we will strike you with a nuclear weapon if you do something that hurts us. It doesn't matter if you do something in the water or if you do something on land or in the air. Who cares? We're just gonna strike you with a nuclear weapon on Moscow. And so it doesn't make sense to sort of section off different types of deterrence. Like, oh, there's land deterrence, there's sea deterrence. Like, no, it's just we're gonna hit you if you mess with us. So it seems rather non-unique. In addition, like people are reading this as like French submarines specifically solve, but submarines are not nuclear sharing. Like nuclear sharing is only planes. That's how it works. You send a plane or you reconfigure their plane so that they can hold your nuclear weapons. At least that's how it always has worked. You would have to read some like crazy evidence that like this time specifically, for the first time ever, we're gonna like share submarines or like we're gonna like build you a submarine over the course of a few years and then like equip that with a nuclear weapon. It doesn't really make that much sense to me. Especially because like a lot of these countries, I don't know, like where are they going to put the submarines? I mean, I don't know. Like I guess Poland and Germany have coastlines, but still, like I don't know. France only has four submarines. I don't think it's going to share a submarine. And if it makes new ones, it really takes so long. That's why nuclear sharing has always just been planes. I think there's a million other reasons too, like flexibility, commitment level, like etc. So it's not going to be submarines. French submarines already exist. I don't know what this argument is. Okay. Uh, escalation. Let's see. This argument is pretty good. Obviously, read deterrence against it. Deterrence turns this. How do you tie break them? Will you say clearly Russia is more proactive than reactive? So, if you win that they would escalate, then they would have escalated anyway. Hello? Like, are you looking at Ukraine? Like, either we wait for them to bully us, or we respond and they bully us anyway, if your link is true. But that's better than like not doing anything about it, right? Um, it's better to stand our ground against Russia. They get emboldened to escalate more, which flips this argument. Emboldened more if they get away um, with aggression and we appease them. For example, by not responding with a nuclear sharing agreement. Um, cool. And that's decent like link weighing between those. You can also just like say uniqueness stuff. Like Russia likely to attack or has high incentives and capacity to attack now. Um, so, like try or die kind of stuff. Um, Next response to escalation. This is my favorite one. More actors will feel threatened into doing things that escalate even more in the con world. Um, we reassure them. So nuclear sharing is a pressure valve. Uh, this is stuff like prolif, but it doesn't have to only be prolif. This could also be a million other different things. So I think this is a good turn. This is like my favorite pro argument on the topic right now. Again, this is like the comparative kind of thing. I think it's great. I think you just need to find some creative scenarios that are not just prolif, and then I think it's actually fairly straightforward to win with it. Okay, next, French politics. French politics is an interesting argument. The problem is this is not enough to tip the scales. People really just don't care that much and care more about other things. Second, because of this, this will most likely be done in a way that hurts centrist politics the least. So framing, like rhetorical framing, um, what else? Like the actual implementation, etc., will all retain sovereignty, etc. Cool. So very small link, if any. And then number three, 2027 presidential elections are a million years away. There are so many other things that will change. Like we don't even really know the front runners yet, know who's running officially yet. So it's like I don't know how we're supposed to predict this. There's just like the probability that this influences it that much is vanishingly small given how far away it is. Like people are probably going to forget about the nuclear sharing agreement by the time 2027 rolls around. I don't know. And then also there's like whatever, there's like an article in the French Constitution that says the president can overrule parliament on security matters anyway. So like arguably no impact, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's a lot of, I guess, different things. This depends on how they're reading the French politics scenario. There's like a gridlock scenario for parliament, like backlash immediately, or there's like an elections disad. Either way, I think this is just not that convincing to me. Okay, Greece. Greece has no link. We are not sharing with Greece. That's like that's all you need. There's no reason we would ever share with Greece. And I guess the negative argument here is an extra reason we would not share with Greece. France knows the negative argument is true, and so they will not share nuclear weapons with Greece. Case closed. Sahel investment. No link. In what world is there a link to investing in the Sahel region of Africa? In what world? How? Is this a trade-off argument? No. If this is a pro argument, where is the link? Where is the link? How does this have any link whatsoever? Um, I don't know. Like, I know that there are former French colonies there. I know that the EU is involved in investing. That's it. That is literally it. There's not a link. There is not a link. I promise you there's not a link. And I also promise you that any tensions or war scenarios will simply up layer. They will be on a higher layer of the debate because they will just control the link to any investment in the Sahel or in other regions and everywhere around the world. And that will just outweigh on scope. And if you're going for a terrorism scenario, then that links into more terrorism. So GG. Um, more investment in all regions. So, okay. I don't think there's any link on Sahel investment. I don't know what this argument is, but you call for the link card. It doesn't say that nuclear sharing will increase or decrease investment in the Sahel. So, yeah. Okay, next, sharing nuclear energy. There's no link. This is not the topic. Case closed. Also, like, I don't know, nuclear energy bad. We just did a whole topic on this, right? That seems fairly easy. Yeah. And then also, like, um, no link because if any nuclear energy, it would be the experimental reactor or the what is it, research reactors, which aren't commercial. They're just there for like military purposes. And okay, sure. Econ trade-off or cost. I terribly small link. Like, what is this argument, bro? How much money is it gonna cost to like take 10 jets from Germany and like tweak them a little bit so that they can fit a French warhead and then like that's it. I don't know. You have to build like a cabin for some French pilots. You have to like build some fences if you're gonna move the nuclear warhead there. You have to like build an underground bunker. Um, yeah, this costs money and it's not insignificant, but in the grand scheme of defense spending, it is insignificant. It is like nothing, right? Especially given that all of these countries are committed to 5% of their GDP on defense anyway. They're like looking for random ways to throw their money into security. I don't think that there's any trade-off. I don't think that there's any cost DA. And it's non-unique if there is one because of the 5% target from the NATO summit. Like, I don't know what this argument is, guys. Cost arguments are always suspicious. So the small link is it's pretty cheap. Like, to be honest, it is we especially because like realistically, no reason that this has to involve a big expansion of the arsenal. If any expansion of the arsenal, and France doesn't really want to, so it's not a likely implementation. So unless you win like the topicality, like T create capability means that you have to expand the arsenal. Even then, like by how much? It doesn't say substantial. So okay, they build like 5 new warheads. And that does cost money, but it doesn't cost that much money, and they already have like 250 or 290, so it's not that much. Okay, next response would be this is the problem with cost arguments is like we don't know where the money will come from. Realistically, not one source. So it'll be like the negative impact will be dispersed over like a million different sources. And realistically, they will cut the least important things first. Also, like EU loan guarantees will probably just solve. Like, I don't know, France can just dip into it can either cut things that don't matter as much or cut waste. It can increase taxes a little bit temporarily. It can, I mean, I feel like it already has a military budget set aside for this. I don't know why, and it won't trade off that much with like conventional spending. I don't think this is a real argument. Okay. There's two arguments here that I want to block out real quick that I was sent. First is about testing nuclear weapons in Algeria. being a bad thing. So let's just really quick think of as many responses as we can. One, no expansion of nuclear arsenal. For the same reason we talked about earlier, means no new testing. Two, even if expansion, no need to test existing nuclear warhead models. Three, they can't and won't test because of they France signed the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Four, um, I feel like it's all just no link arguments, right? I mean, I don't want to say Algeria testing is not that bad. Um, wait, let's actually do a little bit of research, shall we? So, France, Algeria, nuclear tests, news. They're seeking justice. Yep, yep. Um, so I feel like all of this means that they probably wouldn't do it in Algeria, right? Um, justice, justice, justice. This seems very bad. I don't want to say no impact. There probably is a terrible impact. But like evidence like this, like it seems like France has acknowledged at least a little bit that this was bad and that there's backlash. So backlash from Algeria and the public means France wouldn't go there to test. Um, again, what else? What else? What else? What else? Oh yeah, like more prolif in the con world means more testing in lots of different vulnerable places, probably possibly including Algeria. I don't know, it depends. Um, and then obviously any war scenario spurs um proliferation, which involves more testing. Any other responses? Algerian tests. Algerian testing. Algeria will say no and prevent France from testing there. It's not a colony anymore, so you can't just test there without its consent. That seems like an obvious response. Um, uh, I think that's enough. I think that seven responses is enough. Okay. A2 disarmament. Actually, we can think of more responses. One more response is turn without French nuclear sharing. France might instead seek to make its commitment credible through other means, like expanding its arsenal more, which requires more testing. Also means non-unique if we lose the link to the turn. Cool. Anything else? Anything else? No, I think that's good. Okay, disarmament. One. So this argument says the EU is leading the charge on disarmament. I feel like that's not really true. Wait, really quick. Disarmament, nuclear disarmament news. Because I feel like I'm just incredibly skeptical of the uniqueness here. Um, yeah, okay. World's nuclear disarmament era over. I feel like that's really conclusive. Don't really need to read too much of that. So it's not happening. It's not happening or succeeding. Okay, sure. Um, hello? Yeah. And this probably says that China, India, Pakistan, Israel will increase nuclear muscle, blah, 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 blah. Is there anything about Europe? Nothing about Europe. Okay, how about Europe? Nuclear, uh, disarm, and then news, blah, 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 blah. Nuclear weapons in Europe are meant to be used to, okay. Um, there's a dialogue with Japan that could be promising for the other side. Uh, I feel like the answer is just like since the Ukraine invasion, disarmament talks aren't really as real in Europe anymore. I think that's true. Like for example, in Germany, they flipped immediately. They like in back in like 2020, they were talking about getting US nukes out, and now like as soon as Ukraine gets invaded, they're talking about increasing US nukes or maybe even possibly making their own. So I feel like the script is flipped in Europe. I don't really think that the EU is leading the way on disarmament right now. Um, what else? What else? Um, I think you could say, given that this doesn't violate the NPT, this isn't at odds with disarmament and is seen as a temporary stopgap to prevent um, greater proliferation. This is just perception stuff. It does, in fact, prevent more proliferation, which hurts disarmament efforts even more. And I guess the other thing is just like, even if the EU is pushing for disarmament, it realistically can't do anything. The reason why is because incentives for nuclear armament are existential and not determined by EU norms. And that is just true. Where has this ever succeeded? Um, anything else? Um, maybe there's like a disarmament bad or like partial disarmament bad stuff, or like disarmament will fail because as nuclear weapons dwindle, the comparative advantage, security advantage, and power advantage of possessing them rises. Um, it's kind of like economics, right? Like as the supply of something falls, then the price rises, um, which causes a balloon effect, where suddenly pressure to proliferate increases. Okay. Anything else? I think that's good enough. That's six responses on disarmament, analytically, and of course, like probably inspiration for many more afterwards. Let's play our GeoGuessr and finish up. Okay. Um, hoping for a good seed this time. Let's see. Okay, what is this? This is interesting. Um, I don't love what I am seeing. What is this? What is this? Hello? This this curb here, like the edge of this road, is suspicious. I don't know what this is. What are these trees? Okay, is this Europe or Asia? First of all, I unfortunately do not know. Um, I will be very unhappy if this is Japan, for example. Um, but I don't want to rule it out. Like it could be. Like low-key Asia was my first thought. I don't know why, but like low-key it's Switzerland. Um, how to tell? I mean, it kind of looks more like Switzerland, right? I feel like this gravel road with this grass, like you wouldn't really get that very much in Japan, would you? Would you, would you, would you? I don't know. I might. Oh, this is gonna be bad. These trees are sus. I might go Switzerland. Is that a crazy move? That might be a crazy move. I might be cooked here. It might be Japan. Is it Japan? Please don't be Japan. Please don't be Japan. Is this? Asian. Low key, it might be Japan. This grass, dude, this grass, you wouldn't see this grass in Switzerland, would you? Like this, like, ooh, this is giving Japan. I feel like it's Japan. Oh gosh, please. Yes, it was Japan. Okay, I'm happy about that. That was almost really bad. Okay, what is this one? Is there writing here? Kind of PW. I mean, that looks like Latin script. At least we have that. Um, what is this? Why is it giving me hard locations today? What the heck? Um, weird tufts of grass. Weird. I mean, this wall is really interesting. Is this white and black striped thing? I mean, this is like this weird white and black striped fence or guardrail or something. What is over here? Like landscape wise, it's kind of giving UK almost. But I don't know why it feels weird for the UK, but it kind of is giving UK. Oh, and we have this kind of hedgerow here almost. Um, and I feel like these weird yellow flowers kind of feel Scottish, actually. I think I've seen them in Scotland. So I'm gonna go Scotland. I'm gonna go up here. Okay, okay, it was Northern Ireland, which is technically the UK. So we got the country. And it's kind of, up north there. That makes sense. Okay, here we are actually in Japan. Again, actually, wait, no, we were in Japan earlier. So we were in Japan again. And I've been studying Japanese infrastructure, so hopefully I can get this. Let's see. We have normal white pole plates. What do we have up here? This could be Chigoku. I could see Chigoku. This pole top, I don't remember, but it's a thing. We do have a bunch of red roofs, actually. Could this just be Chigoku? I think it might just be Chigoku. And this kind of looks like it might be one of those Chigoku things with the Transformers. I think there is an abundance of evidence that we are in Chugoku. And we also have bamboo, which makes sense for more south. So let's click Chugoku. And it was Chugoku. Let's go. Okay, happy with that. And this should be okay, this is the fourth round, so we're almost done. This is clearly Ukraine. We again have the Ukraine flag colors. And where are we thinking? Very like unforested. I'm thinking a little bit more. Well, we have a weird hill. The hill is suspicious, especially with the lack of forest. What kind of trees do we have? Tree action over here. Wait, does that say Odessa? I think that says Odessa in Cyrillic. Although, ooh, that's tough to say. It's really tough to say. But I think that might say Odessa. And that actually makes sense for the region I was thinking. So can we maybe line this up a bit? I mean, that might be a foolish thing to try to do, but could it be all the way down here? That's a really risky guess, but honestly, I don't hate it. Yes, it was pretty close. It was just that road. Okay, nice. So it did say Odessa. Great. And then next, this ending of this street name with TIE, you can barely see. That's going to be Finnish. Let's see if we can find these town names. Might be very difficult. They look very small because they're only 9 and 5 kilometers away. Ranankaila. Let's see if we can find Ranankaila anywhere in Finland. What does it look like? Um, Loki more south, maybe, arguably. Ranankaila. It wouldn't be one of these ones, right? It's not Gotland. Ranankaila. No, it's not. Okay. Ranankaila. Ranankaila. Is it worth looking for? Should I just slam it somewhere in the middle? Ranankaila. Ranankaila. I think this might be foolish to look for. There's so many places. Ranankaila. But I kind of want a 5K. Hmm. 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 Yeah, it's somewhere. Um, I don't think I will find it. which means I'm just gonna slam it in. Okay, yeah, not really findable because at this zoom level you can't even see those places. So that is okay. We have a 23K. Very good score. Happy with that. Missed the Northern Ireland, but that is a-okay. Got some pretty good guesses in Japan, Ukraine, and arguably Finland. So yeah, thanks again for tuning in and expect some more later. I also recorded the interview with our little expert, so that will be out in like 10 hours or so. So look forward to that. Bye bye.